Hey everyone, I hope you guys are enjoying Monster Hunter in whichever fashion you're choosing to play it as. And today I'm going to host a little bit of a discussion topic regarding some new massive changes that could be added into the game when it comes to the survival aspects of Monster Hunter as a whole. This is something that a lot of players probably don't necessarily give a lot of attention to, but although this being of course a monster hunting experience and a action game at that, a lot of explorable areas and a lot of pretty much survival aspects have been already built into the game. This is something that we saw with Monster Hunter World and Iceborne, but when it came to Rise and Sunbreak, they were dialed back a bit. It felt more streamlined for you to focus specifically on the hunt itself and not necessarily what it is that you're focusing on as you're exploring a brand new world in a brand new area. So today I wanted to give a very quick shout out to Game Rant and a brand new article from Cameron Lucas mentioning that Monster Hunter should continue leaning into its gatherer sim survival elements, where they essentially tried to make the case that the survival experience and the exploration as a whole is something that the franchise should be leaning forward for the next mainline game. In their article, they mentioned that Monster Hunter has established itself as one of Capcom's most unique franchises over the course of nearly 2 decades, and many of its games have each come with innovations to their own. Throughout all of the experimentation, this formula has seen Monster Hunter has explored it in several different styles of gameplay and gimmicks alike. In 2018's Monster Hunter World reinvigorated the series with a fresh approach and take, and rumors of its approaching sequel have started to cause fans to reflect on what changes the next title could feature. While Monster Hunter Rise may be the most recent release, World is often seen as a landmark moment for Monster Hunter in the modern era. Rise focuses on pure combat more than ever, bringing new mobility options that have transformed the gameplay. World has similar main focus on taking down monsters, but there can still be more to the experience. Across its large maps dotted with items waiting to be gathered and combined for simple uses, and quests that emphasize obtaining special items over defeating creatures. Monster Hunter World has evoked a sense of the lost past that could bring a new level of immersion to its successor. And that's pretty much one of the biggest differentiators that I think a lot of people don't necessarily pay attention to. Sure, the game feels bigger in that regard when it comes to World because of just the aspects visually and how the game feels. However, like I said at the top of the video, the exploration aspects were dialed back a little bit in Rise and Sunbreak, so you can focus more specifically on the hunt itself. And if you wish to tackle the exploration aspects themselves, you can certainly do so, but is not necessarily a main focus. In fact, this was something that I tackled in a very early video that I did. This might have been back in like April or something like that for Sunbreak, where I specifically spoke about the fact that in the Citadel, for example, every point of emphasis when it comes to exploration and gatherables, at the very least the more important ones, and specifically the unique ones that you'll find in the Citadel, they're all tucked away in the gray areas of the map where essentially monsters cannot reach you no matter what. In World, those areas are segmented off and they're very, very small. The places where the monsters cannot reach you are minimal at best. Rise took those and expanded upon them, so you have exploration areas where you don't necessarily need to feel rushed because the monsters are not going to get to you, and that made the experience feel very different. In fact, to the point that almost every single area in Rise and Sunbreak feels so separate. The gray area where you're safe from the monsters to the monsters where the areas where the monsters are going to be roaming about, where you're almost in a ledge or behind a wall almost 90% of the time, so the monster simply cannot reach you no matter what. I'm looking at the jungle, for example. If you remember the jungle, you're so up high, the monsters are not going to reach you up there, and they could just, bounce around and thwart about and do whatever it is that they want to do, but they're never going to reach you there, and that just kind of makes it feel a little bit weird in that regard, where in World everything was interconnected, I think, a little bit better. The article also continues to mention that Monster Hunter games are famous for their epic battles that can see players toppling tower beasts, but the series has always been about more than simple violence, not just about combat. The actual hunting aspects of the game have taken a backseat when compared to the classic entries. Early releases in this series, starting with even the first game back in 2004, made an important use of items like hot drinks and environmental resistances, paintballs for tracking monsters, and even limited whetstones for weapons and sharpness, with World and Rise having totally streamlined features like these in favor for focusing more on purely monsters. Some players have begun to remember the past more than ever. In that regard, I kind of do disagree a little bit, because I don't think there was any real benefit to having to drink hot potions or cold potions, or having to, sit there and worry about making sure that you carry those extra things, because they lasted so long. They really didn't add much of anything other than the fact that they were there. Now, the paintball argument can be made that, they try to bring it back in a somewhat cheap fashion in Monster Hunter now, and you're seeing the pushback from players, how they're just not happy with how they're cashing in and actually charging you for the way how paintballs work in Monster Hunter now. So in that regard, I'm not necessarily sure those ideas being brought back were all for the better. In the article, they also continue to mention that one of the most controversial entries in the series, Monster Hunter Dose, was the original sequel and sought to go in the direction far removed from the modern design of games, emphasizing the survival mechanics of being a monster or of being a hunter more than any other in the franchise. Dose is both praised by panned for its unwillingness to let players simply run into battles like Rise or even World, with a changing world and its items affected by day and night cycles and shifting seasons. Those gameplay required a level of preparation and optimal usage of ability materials that could bring a lot to the Monster Hunter future. And I would 100% agree with that. But however, I always try to play devil's advocate to both ideas whenever a new one is introduced or something is presented in these type of articles. And my argument to that would be the players who were drawn into World because of just the ease of accessibility, which again, Rise and Sunbreak even explored into even further and just streamlined the experience even more. All those casual players, mind you, whether you consider casual being a good thing or a bad thing, that's irrelevant. Capcom sees them as customers, which is the most important thing that they care about. You don't want to push people away because the game feels cumbersome or too difficult. Dark Souls games have shown that already. For as popular as Dark Souls is never going to be one of the top selling games ever. I believe they do 10 to 15 to maybe 17 million or something along those lines. Elden Ring, I believe, did 20 million as of March of earlier this year. 20 million when it comes to a massive game like that is somewhat good, sure, but why wouldn't you want to do 30 like Zelda or Mario, or presumably Spider-Man 2 is going to do 20 to 25 or some ridiculous number like that. So you have to consider that there is a accessibility point and something of a ease of access to some of these games that just because of the sheer difficulty you wouldn't want to necessarily meet. And Monster Hunter has always been viewed as one of those games that are a little bit of a difficulty curve, and the newer entries have kind of removed that stigma from the franchise. I'm not necessarily sure Capcom will be willing to kind of go back to just be able to bring those ideas back. Lastly, in the article, they mentioned the benefits of streamlining several of the franchise's classic item gathering and crafting systems and world are more than apparent when the quality of the game's monsters and encounters is taken into consideration. But that doesn't mean the next game in style has to continue this trend. Many players may desire simply to get into the actions and the hunts, but other action games can be more purely focused on combat and bosses, which already serve to fill that role. If the follow-up to World, truly seeks to capture the spirit of the classic Monster Hunter franchise, the player's decisions outside of battle need to have a bigger impact, again, by making gathering as important as hunting. Rise may have already continued the shift with the franchise to the opposite direction with its high mobility combat, but there's no reason that the two separate lines of games can't coexist and emphasize on different sides of the Monster Hunter franchise. If Rise eventually receives a follow-up that leans even more heavily into the pure action, then it stands to reason that Monster Hunter World's own sequel could work to live up its namesake in a way that honors the past like never before. My only pushback to this specific section in the article is that they're essentially suggesting that kind of like a a division, kind of like what Pokemon did. Some games focus on spin-offs, and they're like the Arceus of the world, or they're just doing like world building, where the new mainline entries, Scarlet and Violet, are focusing on the new big things and the new ideas. I don't think Capcom is going to do that when it comes to this franchise, where the next new main entry, let's say the next one that we're going to get, Monster Hunter Generation 6, would start up with some world sequel where essentially they focus on the exploration and gathering aspects and the survivability experience of the game, maybe even as a brand new game mode. But instead, once they follow that up with the second team does its thing, and the second follow-up, whether it would be a follow-up to Rise or Sunbreak or something entirely new, would focus more on speeding up the experience and focusing more on combat. I just don't particularly see Capcom trying to take that approach, although one would believe that there is something of a middle ground to be had, or at the very least, like I just mentioned a couple of seconds ago, a brand new game mode being introduced, which is something that I've already spoken about in another video, where a brand new game mode is actually the way that they decide to handle the way the game plays. I recently started playing Diablo 4, and one of the things that surprised me the most about that game is just how easily it is to access. It lets you pick not only the difficulty, but also how it is that you want like the world to basically see you as. Do you want to just focus on the main story and that's that, and everything seems to be a cakewalk and you're just spamming buttons and you're having a good time because you're seeing big numbers flash and everything is okay? Or do you just out of the gate, even if you've never played a Diablo game before, you instantly get high difficulty encounters because you can? That kind of like freedom to be able to do that, I'm not sure if Capcom would be willing to take the game into that level, and how would they even balance that online. I'm not even necessarily sure. Maybe gating off some players if they want to do the true difficulty hard stuff right out of the gate with higher tier. Again, it would be an interesting discussion there to be had, but focusing on survival aspects, and another one most focused on combat aspects and actual gameplay, and streamline the experience. Everything is basically just an arena hunt, kind of like what you ended up getting towards the tail end of Sunbreak. It would be interesting to see how they try to tackle that going forward. But once again, I want to give a huge shout out to Game Rant and Cameron Lucas for their most recent article. Monster Hunter should continue leaning into its gathering sim elements and survival. I'm going to be leaving a link in the description below for their latest article. But if you're brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.